Hello and welcome to the Business of Boutique Fitness podcast, the show where we cut through the noise and give you the strategies, insight and inspiration you need to thrive as a fitness entrepreneur. I'm Alina Cooper, the director of Start Your Studio Profitably, and I'm joined today by my wonderful colleague, Matt Hanton. Welcome, Matt.
Thank you so much for having me, Alina. I'm so excited. I love doing this podcast because I just love, that we just dive into real world strategies and all the things that you really need to be successful as a boutique group fitness owner, like marketing, sales, leadership, operations, everything. And I'm particularly excited today because, I love talking numbers and everything is about the financials today.
Absolutely. So we're going to be really diving deep into how you finance your fitness studio in a smart and sustainable way.
Yeah, and this is a topic that is genuinely really close to my heart because so much of our success and our feasibility as a studio comes back to our financials, right? And I've seen so many studios fail, not because someone's not passionate about what they do, not because they're not a great, group fitness instructor or anything like that, but purely because they just haven't been able to get their financials right from the start, and it set them for just an uphill battle from day one.
Absolutely. And I can think of a client that springs to mind every time we have this conversation, and they leveraged debt too early. They didn't look at the affordability of that debt as well when they did it. And they ended up operating constantly stressed, constantly under financial pressures, and worrying how they were going to make those repayments alongside some of their other operating costs and payroll each month. And that's not a position we want any studio owner to be in on day one.
Absolutely. And I think today what I really want to take everyone through is those practical real world funding strategies that can get your studio open and thriving from day one, but also for our listeners out there who are already open, just how money factors into the whole overall equation and strategies for managing it a little bit better so that you can be operating with confidence.
So Matt, I'd love to understand kind of your thoughts on what are the true costs for opening a studio. Obviously, we work with lots of studios within the SYSP team, and they do vary based on scope, modality, etc. But I'd love for you to share if you've got any thoughts on what the average costs are and some of the key steps that people should go through to get to that stage.
Yeah, absolutely. And when we say it varies a lot, right? So it's going to depend on things like your market, what area you're in, because if you're opening a studio in LA or Manhattan, it's going to be very different to if you're opening a studio in a regional, smaller town or something like that, right? So we can be looking anywhere from 150,000 at kind of the lower end. We can go up to 500,000 is kind of like the average ballpark. But then, of course, we work with studios who, it's in the millions when they open. So it is a big variance, right? But I think fundamentally, it's all the same kind of cost lines that we look when we're projecting all of this out, right? So lease is a big one. Right? That's going to be huge from day one. Your build out, your construction costs, that is going to be huge. Your equipment fit out is going to be massive. But, obviously people are conscious of those things. I think the ones that stand out for me that people are sometimes a little bit less mindful of is having that working capital in place to cover your expenses for the first couple of months. Factoring that into startup costs is really important. And another one too is marketing. That is going to be a huge cost for you before you open your doors, right? And it's not just a matter of throwing a couple of ads on Meta. It's an entire strategy that needs funding behind it in order to make it successful.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more, Matt. And I think there's even more hidden costs that we don't think about underneath those layers as well, of things like permitting delays, understanding how long that pre-sale period will take. And like you say, the marketing costs, really key there. Software integrations is often a conversation I've had with clients that they haven't necessarily thought through all of the different elements that might make up their tech stack. They may have thought about their CRM, but they haven't thought about whether there's further email marketing tools they need, SMS tools, and all of these costs do add up over time. And one big thing that I always speak to clients about is having a contingency in there. And without that, you set yourself up for failure from day one, because every project we see, they go over on certain things, they might save on other things, but generally there is always unexpected costs, unexpected delays that we do need to cover.
Yep. And it's not like $1,000 for your contingency. It's not $5,000. It's a pretty big percentage is what I factor in, because then I just think to myself, well, if we don't need it, great. But when that unexpected, dreaded phone call comes from your contractor and they tell you, I've got some bad news, at least you know you've got the money in there.
And what percentage would you factor in?
I like to do 20.
Okay.
Yeah, 20 is really robust. And depending on the size, right? If we're doing a $500,000 build out, 20% is a huge number, right? But that's where I start, and then I see what number that's giving me, and I kind of massage it from there.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm similar. I would probably go between 10 to 20, 20 at the kind of top end, especially for some of these bigger builds and fit outs. And especially when there's quite complex construction requirements as well, where you're inputting full HVAC systems, etc. That's where those costs can really creep up. So let's talk about the different ways of funding your business. So first things first, and something that some owners are really keen to look at is starting lean, so bootstrapping their businesses. And this can be a fantastic way of getting your concept off the ground, but it does, as we know, come with some limitations. But on the flip side, minimal risk, eh? And I've worked with founders who've started smaller studios via bootstrapping, who have sublease spaces, who have run mobile classes, or have launched with pop-up events rather than going for a full lease. And the pros with this, you maintain those full ownership, you get creative control, and you avoid that debt. And some people are terrified of debt. And it's always something that we talk about a lot in this process and in this journey with clients. And we shouldn't be afraid of debt, especially if we've done the research, we've looked at the numbers, and we understand what is affordable. It can be a sensible risk to take. But there's limitations. Matt, what are your thoughts on some of the limitations there?
Absolutely. Well, the things that stand out for me is that growth can be slower, right? So if you're kind of entering into it in a more sort of bare bones way, then, you are kind of coming out of the gate at a slower pace. And there's nothing wrong with that. It can just take you a little bit longer to kind of hit your revenue goals. And a lot of the time we're doing this so that we can exit out of our corporate jobs, or we can, fund the lifestyle that we want for ourselves. And as long as we're aware that that can just take a little bit longer with this method, then that's okay. But we just need to be mindful of it, right? I think that the other part of it for me too is it's really important to consider your brand if you're going to take this approach, right? Because if you're wanting to present yourself as kind of a luxury, high-end experience, it's very fancy and very luxurious, but you're bootstrapping it to open, those two things don't align. And then you're going to get a really conflicted message that's going out to your community, and you do only get one chance to make that first impression.
Do you know what, 100%. And one thing I see when businesses are bootstrapping is they often cut on their marketing and their branding. And they're two areas we cannot and should not be cutting. And it seems to be something that happens regularly in businesses, and businesses that have been open for a number of years as well. Often that marketing budget, when things are a little bit tight, is cut back. And it's counterintuitive. They're the two areas you have to get right.
And we see it all the time with our clients as well. Often when we're kind of doing that discovery phase with them and we're speaking to them about branding and marketing, they kind of go, oh, well, I thought I could just throw together a logo or throw together some fonts or something like that. And then when you actually take them through the process of what goes into branding and marketing, not only do they see the value in it, but they realize that it is much more complicated than just jumping on your laptop or jumping on AI and asking them to spit something out.
Yeah, I may cry if I see another ChatGPT logo. But I think as well, it's your brand, it goes so much further. And today's consumers are so much more savvy. They want to really understand the purpose and values behind a brand. And a logo that's been generated out of ChatGPT, and I'm a big fan of AI tools and I use them regularly. But there's some things that just don't work through it. You can get ideas, you can get concepts, you can look at your brand purpose, mission, vision using AI tools. But actually, your branding, bringing that concept to life so that you can live and breathe that every single day, and that it flows through the different channels, flows through insight online, is so important. And actually, that's an area where you should be investing. And you should be investing in doing it right from day one. So please, please, please don't cut that budget.
Absolutely. Okay, so we've come to terms with the fact that, it doesn't align with our brand to bootstraps. We've got a lot of upfront costs that we're going to need, and we just can't take that route. What is the most common way that we secure funds? And I think you would agree with me that the vast majority of our clients will go with an SBA loan, right? So if anyone's like, what is an SBA loan? It's a small business association loan. They're government backed, which is fantastic because particularly after 2020, we know that the government can step in and sometimes directly impact our businesses. And if you're on an SBA loan, and for whatever reason, the government needs to shut us down, we're not accountable for that money repayment, right? They will pause all of that, which is really nice. So post-pandemic, this is definitely the way that we see people going. Probably, I would say over 30%, 30 to 50% of our clients are sitting on the SBA route.
And obviously this is an American only concept.
Right.
So we do have to look at other funding options outside of the US, which we will come on to talk to you a little bit about today. But for our US based clients, like you say, it is probably the most popular route to go. Talk to me a little bit about some of the considerations and some of the things we should be looking at. Any red flags for SBA for their applications? Because I know obviously Alex, who's part of our team, is the SBA man. He knows the ins and outs and all of the details. But obviously, we get to experience a lot of that as well. So talk to me a little bit about what you've learned through, whether it be conversations with Alex, working directly with clients, and how we prep clients for the application process, the length of that application process, and some of the key considerations.
For sure. And thank you for clarifying that it is an American thing, because I just realized we're sitting here with a British accent and an Australian accent, but we are sitting in the United States as we record this. So thank you for clarifying that. So the SBA process, okay, there's a whole lot of work that goes into it before you even start your application, right? So essentially what that looks like is you want really robust financial projections, okay? And this just can't be in a Word document that you've thrown together and you've just arbitrarily put some numbers in. You really need robust financial projections, because that will anchor your application and be the primary thing that your lender's going to consider, right? Then there's a whole lot of ancillary supplementary documentation that you also want to consider, which is a really robust business plan, which is essentially telling the story behind your numbers. You want to make sure you've got things like a responsibility map, which clearly outlines your labor costs, those being one of the most material items that you're going to have, right? You want an org chart where you can show current state and future state, so that you're indicating growth and that you've considered the way that you're going to structure your business as you grow and as your revenue increases, right? Then there's all the things that you're going to need personally outside of your business, like personal financial statements, tax records, hopefully a really good credit score, right? Having said that, there is workarounds if your credit score is kind of a work in progress right now, but that is one thing that they will look for as well. So once you've kind of got all of that, it's really important to then do a number of interviews with different lenders, okay? Because different lenders are going to have different criteria, different kinds of clients that they lend to. And it's really important that you're establishing a relationship with your lender, because a large part of it is going to be that they will then pass along your application to an underwriter who you're never going to meet, right? You're never going to get the chance to present in front of that person. So having the strong relationship with your point of contact is going to really help you when your loan gets to that point, right? So it's a whole process. And then once you get to that point and you choose your lender and you submit, don't hold your breath, because you're likely going to be waiting at least 30 days for a response. It's very common to get questions fired back at you for clarification. So there's a little bit of back and forth on things. And then once it's approved, to actually get the money dispersed is going to be a whole nother step. So it is a bit of a process, but as long as you're navigating it with confidence, really knowing your business, doing your research, knowing your numbers, and really working your relationships, then it's a really strong path to take.
Thank you, Matt. I think that's really useful to understand the reality of the process you have to go through, and knowing your numbers and making sure you can confidently communicate that with the lenders is really important. If you're reading off a piece of paper and you can't tell them your key metrics within your business, you can't clearly communicate what it is you're trying to achieve, that's red flags straight away before you've even submitted. And one thing we do see is actually making sure your application is really robust from day one will save a lot of the back and forth. It will save the lender coming back to you and saying, can I have XYZ? And that pinging pong back and forth, because that delays it ultimately. And on average, we usually see it takes 3 to 4 months to get the money physically in your bank. So you need to be planning for that, and you need to create that urgency, and don't sit back and wait. If you haven't heard from them in the time frame they've given you, don't be afraid to chase. And obviously to do it with patience and care. You want these people on your side ultimately, but this is such a key part of your business, and we can't move forward. Even if you want to be opening a couple of months later, if we haven't got the funding, we need to be pushing those dates back. Yeah. So don't sit on your laurels. I think it's something that can be quite scary for a lot of people. But as you know, we handhold our clients through that process to make sure they get the best success available.
Absolutely, yeah. And pro tip with this one too, if you're looking at going down this option and you're doing your lender interviews and there's a few different lenders that you really quite like and think that you could work with, don't apply or submit an application with all of them straight off the bat, right? You want to go with your favorite first, because as part of that discovery process where they're asking you questions, they're drilling down on things, and potentially don't get dejected if you get a rejection. Okay, it is very common to get a rejection straight up, right? But what you do is you take that learning, you take all the information and kind of the questions that they were asking, and then you update your application and go to your next lender, right? And at that point, it's okay to maybe go with 2 or 3 because you've really had the chance to, polish up your application. But if you go to all 3 or 4 straight off the bat and you've got those errors in there or those gaps, then you're setting yourself up to end up in a sticky situation.
I'm so glad you shared that, Matt, because we have seen this happen. We've had clients who've tried to submit to 9 lenders simultaneously, and this rings so many alarm bells for the lenders, and the alarm bell it rings is this is potentially fraud.
Right.
And if that alarm bell is rang, there's often no going back with that particular application. So
not a great reputation.
Do just take your time. As Matt said, 1 lender at a time where possible, and don't get dejected, because there are other options available, which actually we're going to come on to talk about. Yeah. But before we do move to that, I just want to touch on some of the loans and other options that are available outside of the US. So obviously, you know your market better than anyone else. And something that's really important to do is to do your research as to what loans, grants, etc. are available in your particular area. And the thing to note here is this changes really rapidly and depends on what your local government are looking to support. And often there can be grants for new businesses available. There's particular grants sometimes for female-led businesses or businesses in specific areas. So it's worth doing some research and exploring. There's also a number of startup loans available as well in certain countries. So for example, in the UK, we don't have the luxury of an SBA, unfortunately, but we do have options around some new startup loans, business loans that are at a much lower rate and allow you to get going. But it is really important to really look at the interest rates and the repayment plans on these loans as well, because they can sometimes be a lot higher, which actually down the line can be a risk to your business ultimately.
Also, early payoff penalties. So if you return the money on a loan early and you get hit with a bill for paying it off early, you're kind of being punished for your success. So definitely make sure as part of like your lender interviews, if it's SBA or if you're pursuing other options, that you're really familiarizing yourselves with the terms of the loan.
Yeah, absolutely. And if a loan isn't the right fit for you, there are other options when it comes to lines of credit. And we have seen clients look at options around credit stacking, using credit cards for those smaller purchases and short-term needs. And I think with all of these considerations, it's just making sure that you model your cash flow so that you know that you can handle those repayments and it's not going to be detrimental to your business. And I think some of the things for me as well is avoid balloon payments, far from ideal. Be cautious with those higher interest bridge type loans. And where possible, never sign a personal guarantee without a clear plan for mitigating that risk. And there are occasions where you do have to personally guarantee things. My business partner and I have done that in our business previously. But you've got to understand the risk of that and have a plan in place for what if. So let's move on, because there's lots of different alternative funding options available. And one that I wanted to talk about today, which is something that I've used personally myself, so I can talk about this a lot, is private investment. And we don't see this happening as much in the US market with our clients. We are seeing a lot more SBA. But in other markets where there aren't SBA loans and some of the new business startup loans aren't that preferable, we do see a lot of external investment and strategic partners. For my business, and I've shared this with you before, Matt, we are actually a private equity backed business. And since then, we've actually got a high net worth individual that's invested in our business. And again, like with all lending options, there's pros and cons to this. And what you've got to consider when looking at these different options is firstly, who are you going to go out to? Who are the right fit for your business? Because like you talked about with a lender, you've got to have the right relationship. With an investor, even more critical, because actually depending on the size of the investment, they're often going to want to have some involvement in your business. And in larger cases, with our first round of investment, we raised 2.4 million. And with part of that, they wanted a seat on the board. They wanted to have a certain amount of decision power. And there's certain caveats in our contracts that we have to run certain decisions by them. So these things are all fine, but you have to understand the detail. You have to understand the impact it's going to have on your business. And you want to make sure that you're maintaining that control. It's also really important with these, especially private investment, they're going to want equity in the most part. You know, there are debt-based options available as well, but often we see equity-based partnerships. And to get that equity number, we're not just finger in the air thinking, okay, I'm going to give them 20% of my business. More thought needs to go into that process. We need to value our business. And obviously it's hard to value a business that isn't open, but we need to value it based on where we think we're going to be. And that's based on your projections. And in each market, it varies, but we're basically looking at a multiple of the EBITDA. And in the UK at the moment, we're seeing anything between 4 to 8 times EBITDA. Sometimes we have seen some higher up at the 12 mark, but that gives you a rough idea at maturity what your business could be worth. Once you've got that valuation, you need to decide the equity that investor is going to be giving you. What percentage does that equate to? What is a sensible number to give away? And I absolutely don't suggest you do this on your own. Work with your accountant or work with someone that specializes in valuing businesses, because again, this could be make or break. You give away too much and it could leave you in serious problems down the line. So it's thinking about that, but also thinking about that longer term strategy. And when you're doing private investment, one of the big things you've got to think about is your exit, which often when we ask studio owners, what are your exit plans? They haven't even considered that. Yeah. And there are multiple options for exits, but your investors will want to look at how do they get their money back? What is going to be the return on investment for them? And what's the time frame for that? What are the different options for that? Could it be a management buyout? Could it be a sale, etc.? Endless options, really, but you do have to start thinking through that detail. And they will also often want to know what the future plans for the company are as well. Are you planning on scaling? And again, Matt, I'm sure you can think of a few examples. We've had clients that come to us on day one and are like, I'm going to take over the world. And we've had clients that are like, oh, I might just do 1, maybe 2. But you have to not commit, because obviously plans change, but you have to put in place that strategy, not just for the first site, but for what that looks like thereafter. Yeah. And you can change that. Right. There's no right or wrong. But the key thing is having that level of detail. And then the second part that I just wanted to share on the investment piece is really taking your time and you doing your due diligence. I can't speak today, Matt. Fill that word in for me. Due diligence. You doing your due diligence on them, because they will do the most robust due diligence on you, even more so than I'd say than SBA loan applications. And they will want to dive into every part of your business and also your personal finances as well. And what's key there is when you're looking at that partnership, you've got to make sure that that investor aligns with your values, because this person is going to be in bed with you for the next 3 to 5 years, potentially, if not longer. And having the wrong partner can be really painful. So don't be afraid to ask them challenging conversations. Test them, see who is, you've got to agree to who that person that will sit on your board is going to be.
I'm so glad you brought that up, because I have worked with clients who have been taking the investor route in terms of their funding, and it seems obvious to say it now, but when you're in this situation, when you have someone who you've just met offering you hundreds of thousands of dollars, and these investors they're often they present very well, they have a very nice watch on, They're very charismatic, right? And if you're not doing your due diligence, it's very easy to get swept up in the kind of, oh my gosh, I just met this great person and he believes in me and he wants to give me all this money. And it doesn't, you just need to take a step back and you just need to read the room and do your due diligence, like you said. So I'm really glad that you brought that up so that people don't get swept up in the hype of it all.
No, absolutely. And don't be afraid to say no.
For sure.
We certainly did this, and it was one of the most painful no's I've ever given to someone, but we were offered the money twice when we did the first round of investment. And both of us just felt that the person in question just wasn't aligned with our business. And some of the, as simple as some of the things that he'd said, some of the comments, some of the wording, as simple as that, we had this gut feeling deep down. Because on paper, he was a good fit. But actually, from a values, personality perspective, we just knew there was something not quite right. And that's a bold decision to make based on instinct. And as Matt knows, I'm someone that likes to make decisions based on fact and data. And I think we're quite aligned in the sense that we both love numbers. But in that instinct, we made it on gut. And we made it on gut because, yes, they were offering us multiple millions of pounds, but we knew there wasn't something quite right. And if you've got one person interested, the reality is more are going to be interested because it showcases and give you that confidence to know that this is viable. You've done your homework. You've got a viable business plan here. And if it does take you a little bit longer, that's okay. And one thing to note on the time frame, if you're looking to open your studio quickly and you haven't secured your investment yet, and that's the route you want to go, it isn't a quick fix. An SBA or credit stacking is a much quicker option. From experience, these processes can take anything from 4 to 12 months. The quickest I've really seen it happen in the last few years is around 6 months, especially as a newco. If you're an established business, it can move a little bit quicker. But just with the back and forth, the going out, the finding the right investors, and that side of things can take longer. However, there are some alternatives to that. And I think one of the things to consider is your own network. And often people can be a little afraid to do this. And I think it doesn't necessarily have to be immediate friends and family, of which obviously are a good option, especially if they believe in what you're doing and it is viable. But actually reaching out to your community, if you're an instructor who's been teaching for many, many years at a particular studio or location, subject to that not being excluded in your contract with them, there is actually options to reach out to your network and put a really robust pitch out to them. And if they believe in you, they like you, they've known you for multiple years, and they can see that there's viable return for them, they may well actually be interested. And again, I have done this personally. We've sent it out to our database, and one of our more recent investors is a high net worth individual that's been with us for, I think, close to 8-9 years as a client, and has now subsequently invested all of the follow-on for our future sites. So there are options available, and don't be afraid to ask that question. The worst you're going to get is a no. And then, a no is a no. We can move on. We go to the next one. And I think you mentioned it when it comes to SBA is when it comes to funding, you are going to get rejection. The same as when it comes to sales. And actually being able to just brush yourself off and move on to the next one is a real skill. And not everyone finds that as easy as others. But don't get disheartened. If you genuinely have a viable business, there will be options to fund it.
Yeah. And you mentioned Alex, who works with Studio Grow as our funding expert. And a word that I hear him use frequently throughout this process is tenacity, right? You've really learned tenacity in going through this. But yeah, it just means it wasn't the right fit, but there are always different options. And I've worked with clients where we've started with an SBA, we've pivoted away from that, and we've gone with investor, and we've pivoted away from that, and we've gone with credit stacking, right? So there's always another way that we can make the dream happen.
Yeah, and you've got things like crowdfunding as well. We've seen a couple of clients go down that route. And again, that does involve an investment upfront. So there's a couple of things we do see with crowdfunding is firstly, you have to have a super slick presentation, including video content. So you do have to invest in that. It's not something you can just quickly film yourself on your iPhone. And secondly, the most successful crowdfunding campaigns are ones where there's already been usually around 50% of the money raised already. And that actually just reminded me of something, Matt. Obviously, one thing we do see is that no matter what the route for investment, whether it be loans, credit stacking, crowdfunding, private investment, they all want to see what you're putting up front. And what's that number that you think is the minimum that someone should be investing in the business themselves, and why do they have to have that?
Yeah, well, I think everyone's going to be slightly different, but I think that it's just really important that you do have that personal investment in it, right? It just sends this message. If you're not personally investing in your brand or your company, even if you're presenting as though you believe really strongly in everything, you haven't put your money where your mouth is, right? So it doesn't necessarily have to be a huge amount, particularly if you're in a position where that's not possible. But I think people do want to see that because it puts action into words into action.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think I'm generally seeing that it needs to be at least 20% of the total value. Obviously, there are some exceptions. And in the case of crowdfunding, often it needs to be around 40-50%.
Yep.
So you do need to make sure you're in a robust financial position to be starting this business yourself. Because even if you're planning on funding the business through loans, credit cards, etc., you will still need to make some payments up front. There's still certain costs that will need to be paid for prior to these funds being received. So you do need to have a natural level of cash flow just to get the business up and running and do that level of feasibility and study.
Absolutely. And I think one of the last ones that I want to raise, which kind of flows on from this similar sort of crowdfunding Kickstarter vibes, is presale.
Yes.
Okay, this is one that, I mean, we should be doing this regardless of if we've secured our funding through SBA or a different means. Either way, we should always be doing pre-sale and a really strong, robust pre-sale strategy before we open. However, it's a great way to generate a heap of revenue before you've even opened your doors, right? So you can use that as either your funding source or a bridge gap or something like that if you need some additional funding, whatever it may be. But just think about it. If you can sell 100 founding memberships before you even open your doors, that is a massive cash injection that you get. It also demonstrates in black and white that you have a business that is feasible, successful, it's got excitement about it, and hopefully you've sold those pre-sale memberships on a contract term, and hopefully that contract term is 12 months. So then that also allows you to demonstrate that you have 12 months worth of accounts receivable that you can then show for crowdfunding. You can take to a bank. I think that that's a really important step in all of this too.
Agreed. And I think financial planning goes far past just this initial investment. Matt, share with me your thoughts on what new studio owners should be looking at and what the key considerations are post-funding.
Yeah, so if you're not a numbers person, become one. I don't know how else to say it, right? However, you have to make the numbers work for you, whether it's more, focusing on a couple of numbers and then translating them into a story or an action plan in your mind because you just don't love numbers. It all comes down to being really close to your KPIs, right? So it's obviously going to be things like studying your P&Ls every month, right? Understanding your accounts receivable that you have coming in the door, where your sales are at, the seasonality of your business as well is going to be a really important one. If you're doing your SBA application and your projections are just the same every month, it's just not going to go well, right? Because your expenses in like a January, for example, are going to be different to a July or an August or something like that. So it's really important to make sure that you're staying really close to your numbers so that you can know the lay of the land, even if it is a little bit scary, because if you put your head in the sand, it's just not the way to go.
And I would say that most of the clients we often work with are quite fearful of numbers. They are so passionate about their modality in the most part, and they have got so much love for what they do, but they're not necessarily always numbers people. And you don't have to be a mathematician to be able to understand your P&L, but actually, if it's something that does baffle you a little bit, actually work with someone who is going to help, your accountant, your bookkeeper, get them to teach you. It's not rocket science, but it does take some time just to understand those kind of key terms within that financial planning piece, and to also know how to track these numbers against budget. And I think one consideration there as well is cost control. It's very easy When your business needs something, or your front of house team come to you and say, we need X, Y, Z, or you think, oh, I'm really, the workload's huge this week, we need an extra staff member. Before you make any of those decisions, check your budget. If you are behind on your revenue, you absolutely need to be behind on your costs. You need to come in lower, because that will balance the books. If you're smashing it, then yes, you will probably go over budget on your cost control, and that's okay, but it needs to be in line with that. So I would just suggest, if you are going to be making key decisions on purchases, on staffing, especially as we mentioned, the cost of payroll, make them in line with your revenue growth. It shouldn't be a case of your payroll is creeping up, but your revenue is static. Things have to increase simultaneously. And when you do have those early profits, think about reinvesting them in things that really impact the experience for the client. So things like staff training, community events, improving the client experience, rather than splurging on kind of big purchases, the latest piece of flashy equipment or things like that. And just spend wisely. And our goal, we always want clients to have around 6 months operating expenses in the bank. Because if, heaven forbid something does happen, we want to make sure we've got that backup there. If your HVAC system breaks down, you're going to need to fix it. So you need to have some level of cash reserve there to be able to do that. So we don't want to be back to zero every month. And that starts with those initial setup costs of factoring, as you said, the 6 months of operating expenses, but continuing that mindset throughout and actually always holding back on that cash reserve. And some find that easier than others.
Absolutely. And it's ROI, right? It all comes back to ROI, return on investment. There are some costs that on paper you might think that you're able to cost, but the impact that it has to your experience, like you mentioned, or your brand or something like that can actually cost you more money to not be investing that money. So it's really important to make sure that you're making those decisions, exactly like you said, from the perspective of the ratios, and ensuring that everything is balancing, but also that the money that is going out the door is having an impact and you're getting a return on it. It's not just wasted.
Yeah, absolutely. And I probably take quite a harsh line on this, but in my business, when my team come to me and want to purchase something new or add a new member of staff that perhaps is outside, or even if it is budgeted for, my first questions will be to them is it going to increase sales? And is it going to drive retention? And is it going to lower cost? It has to do one of those three things in your business. And if it can't do one of those three things, then it's potentially a pointless expense. And there are exceptions to that rule, admittedly. But when you're at such a fragile point of cash flow, and most new businesses are, obviously we work with the department where we are privileged to open studios profitably from day one. But there's a lot that don't. There's a lot of businesses that aren't profitable for 1, 2, 3 years, some never profitable. And the stats in the industry currently are pretty terrifying. Less than 1 in 10 boutique studios are sustainably profitable. So you do have to really think wisely here. And if you truly want to be a business owner, you have to get into the numbers and into the weeds of that. It's a non-negotiable. So let's recap. We've covered a lot today, from knowing your true startup costs, starting lean when you can, being strategic with any debt you're considering, exploring alternative funding and potentially any grants that may be available, and most importantly, focusing on sustainable growth. Absolutely. So Matt, from your side of things, is there anything else that you think we should discuss today? Anything else you'd like to add for clients out there?
No, I mean, the funding piece doesn't stop when you open your doors, right? And all the skill sets that you've learned in going through that process will serve you really well to keep the doors open. So, like I said, if you're not a numbers person, if that's not your natural disposition, that's okay. But really embrace it, learn it, tell stories with it, because it's just so important at the end of the day.
Yeah. And like you say, funding doesn't necessarily stop after your first studio. A lot of studio owners do want to scale and open 2, 3, 4, 5, numerous studios. And there will become a point where you can self-fund based on the profits from your previous locations, but that doesn't usually happen for the first kind of 1 to 5 sites, depending on the business. So the reality is, for those next 4 sites, you are going to have to secure follow-on capital. And that is an ongoing process. It's a time-consuming process, but it's something that does reap rewards in the long term and allows you to scale quicker than it would if you just self-funded from that point. So if you enjoyed today's episode, please make sure you hit the follow button, leave us a review, share with fellow studio owners, and do leave us any comments. And if you've got any questions, feel free to reach out.